Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our World Bipolar Day webinar, Connecting Together to Create Hope with David Bartley. Every year on March 30th, we celebrate the strength and bravery of those living with bipolar disorder, celebrate their accomplishments, and raise mental health awareness. This year, our theme is Bipolar Together, and as we connect globally by sharing stories and education, we can remind folks that they're not alone in what they're going through, but rather we're in this together. I'm so excited to introduce and be joined by David Bartley, who is a two-time TEDx speaker, storyteller, and trainer who lives with and advocates for bipolar disorder. He's committed to moving the conversation around mental illness and suicide from the dark shadows to the forefront of public concern. So I am so honored to have him here with us today. Thank you so much, David, for joining us.
And what I'd like to do, Micah, is to begin with my story. And I think we all have a story. And my story begins on August 31st, 2011. And this was the day that I was going to kill myself. This is the day that the monster known as Bipolar 2, after trying for close to 40 years, had convinced me of a slate of dark and awful lies. The monster had convinced me that I was stupid and ugly, pitiful, grotesque, that I had no redeeming value, that I was anything but a man, that I had no right to lead my family, that I had become an embarrassment and a burden to the people in my life, that, as this picture shows, that I didn't matter. But the most damning thing, probably the most damning thing that the monster can do for any of us who suffer, is on that particular day, I believed with all my heart and soul that everybody in my then life, my former wife, Deanna, my family and friends, what the monster convinced me of, that if I killed myself, their lives would not just get a little bit better, but would improve exponentially. And so at the time, my former wife, Deanna, who's still a great friend and advocate for me, we were living about 30 minutes east of Sacramento in this little town called Penryn. And it was like a storybook hamlet. And Dee and I lived on this rectangular 2.5-acre parcel of property. And I remember very clearly that last day of August, all those years ago, I woke up and I did this walk around the property, taking in this last experience, enjoying it and feeling it with all 5 of my senses. And then I sat down and typed out my suicide note, which was basically an apology for living, and that knowing that you all would be better off without me. Certainly a lie, but that's what I believed. And then I made the short 20-minute drive from my home to the Forest Hill Bridge. Now, everybody, of course, knows the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, but almost nobody knows the Forest Hill Bridge. And it's 730 feet tall, 500 feet further off the ground than its more famous cousin, just 2 hours to the west. This bridge, this iconic bridge, is the 4th tallest bridge in the United States. Now, I had been plagued with suicidal ideations for close to 40 years. I was 48 years old at the time, and I had been to the bridge on numerous occasions, sometimes just to drive over and back, sometimes to stop, sometimes to walk to the midpoint, sometimes to imagine if this day ever came, like, where would I park my vehicle? What would be the ideal spot that was far enough away to not cause any problem, but close enough where in time it would be discovered? So here was this real life day, not a practice anymore. And I brought my vehicle into that spot, turned off the engine, put my hands on the 10 and 2 position of the steering wheel, took a deep breath, reached over, grabbed the suicide note, placed that right in the center of the dash, took the keys out of the ignition, those in the center of the note, exited, and then had this thought, I got to make sure that the door's unlocked. Check it, it is. Turn back around, come to the closest end of the bridge deck. Now, the view is spectacular at 700 feet, as you can imagine. But on that day, it was like someone, in this case, the monster, before I moved away, said, hey, by the way, you're forgetting something. Take this. And it was a paper towel roll. Because my worldview, everything I could see narrowed down to looking through like a paper towel roll size, a circumference. And all I could see is the light post that stands at the midpoint 1,000 feet away. And so deliberately, with purpose, kind of at a moderate pace, I made my way to that midpoint, turned to my left, and without looking up, bent over, teetering my body on the 4.5-foot suicide barrier. And then with that same small diameter of focus, looked at the North Fork and the American River, all those feet below. And then I closed my eyes for just a moment because the only question that remained, I had done the math. It was going to be 7.5 seconds for me to fall. And the only question that remained, the only thing unanswered was, would I feel the impact? Now, of course, I knew that this was the way for me. There was no way I would survive the drop, but would I feel the impact? And at that moment, my mind began to spin at a rate much like the amusement park ride that most of us have been in. You stand in a circle, it begins to move quicker and quicker and quicker, and the floor drops out, but yet we remain direct as a result of centrifugal force. And I mention this because in that space, on that dark spot, on that tall, tall bridge, my mind racing, me like a teeter-totter right on that rail, the reality that the understanding, the awareness of time and space got pushed to the side. So I don't know how long I stayed in this position. But thankfully, it was long enough for a passing driver to look upon this scene, realize something's not right with the picture, this case, this man, me, pick up the phone, call 911, and a heroic sheriff's deputy approached me from the left-hand side and did two critical things, two life-saving things. The first thing he did is establish contact, which is logistical. But then he created connection, which is life-saving because connection creates hope, and hope saves lives. I was taken off the bridge to an emergency room and then ultimately to a psych ward, a loony bin, a nut house, an insane asylum. At least that's what I thought it was. But in this place, jumping ahead a little bit, my life changed in ways that I never would have thought. But when people found out where I was and why, to say they couldn't understand it would be an amazingly large understatement. Because people didn't see me as clinically depressed, suffering from bipolar 2, believing that he was worthless. No, people saw me as a committed couple, part of a committed couple that ran this amazing animal sanctuary called A Chance for Bliss. And Dee and I did this for a great many years. And if you love animals, you would have loved the sanctuary. Sanctuary was home to as many as 100 animals at any one time, 25 horses. Yes, 23 dogs who lived in the house, 9 potbelly pigs, goats and sheep and ducks and geese and bunnies and birds, a little chihuahua who rode the back of a donkey, Dee Dee on top of Spike, and this huge plethora. And Dee and I were very intentional. We wanted the throwaways, the ones that nobody wanted. We wanted the old ones, the sick ones, the one with special needs, and mostly the ones at the end of their life. So we were like a hospice. And so we did no adoptions. We were the quintessential forever home. An animal came and stayed for whatever period of time they stayed. And we became well known. In fact, on June 2nd, 2010, we were the cover story in the life section of USA Today. I didn't fit the image. I didn't fit the picture of mental illness. Wasn't the poster child, the poster boy for bipolar 2. I wasn't considered to be at high risk for suicide. But one of the most important things that I will tell you, and those brothers and sisters, you part of this global family, we who walk this path, I think that you would say, and a hearty amen, that sometimes what hurts the most cannot be seen. Sometimes great despair and soul-crushing, hope-killing agony lies just behind a forced smile, a distracting joke, or in this case, a seemingly perfect and ideal life. Like, who wouldn't want to run an animal sanctuary? But that's how I was. And people will say, gosh, couldn't Deanna have done anything? Couldn't your family have done anything? I said, no, because I was committed to hide it. They had no idea. It wasn't their fault. The monster had me by the neck and every single day shook me to the point where I believed all these lies. And just 14 short months after this mountaintop experience of being in USA Today, there I was on that dark spot, on that tall, tall bridge, a slight shift of body weight away from killing myself. But I guess life had another idea. Connection, creating hope, hope saving life, hope saved my life. And on a day I thought would be my last day alive, it was instead the first steps in what has now been a 10-year journey away from mental illness and into our birthright. Mental health, mental wellness, peace of mind is not some privilege. When we burst into this life experience, however we define it, we have the inalienable right, just like freedom, to enjoy, to experience, to have part of our existence mental health. There's nothing we did to deserve bipolar, either 1 or 2. It's not our fault. And what I'd like to share in sharing my story is something hopefully of value. And here's what I'd like to share. First, what are some of the reasons why do our brothers and sisters end their life? And every why is unique, but I think I have come upon a quote from an extraordinary person who lives with bipolar that I think is the unfortunate foundation from which all whys spring forth. And then share with you what it feels like, because I still have my days. I still have awful, terrible days. I still have days in which I think about killing myself. But as I like to say, they're in a Tupperware sized container of a day tight compartment. Like, the monster may knock me down for a day, maybe two, maybe three, but he doesn't knock me out, because I know what to do well. But I also want to share with you what caused my condition, which unfortunately is common. It's unique, but it's common for many of us. So the first question is why? And I cannot imagine the agony that those who survive the loss of a beloved family member, a friend, what they must feel in the aftermath of somebody losing their life. And as mentioned, every why is unique, because we are unique. But this quote from the great chef David Chang, who's like a Gordon Ramsay, who has his own battle with bipolar, he says this: when you're depressed, you become convinced that everything you think is true. You could substitute the word suicidal. When you're suicidal, you're convinced that everything you think is true. Dear God, David, why did you want to kill yourself? Because what I believed was that I was worthless and useless, stupid, grotesque, pitiful, and embarrassment and a burden. David, why would you want to be so selfish? Because what I believed was, if I killed myself, your life would be better. And so what I feel is that suicide has nothing to do with data and statistics and medical studies. Suicide in particular is not about that. It's about belief. And belief is highly unique, highly personal. Any of us know that whatever the passionate space of belief we have on whatever subject in our life, you can give us all the data in the world. It's not going to move us away from that point of belief. And this to me is essential, because I think when we understand, if we are endeavoring to help somebody like us who suffers, one of the things that we can do is maybe create a safe place where we can have them look at their beliefs. Maybe we can have them untangle those beliefs. Maybe we can have them create new beliefs. Because in the absence of it, it is our mind, it is our thoughts that are killing us. Thoughts, the sequence looks like this: these horrific thoughts, which lead to overwhelming emotions, derive and direct, unfortunately, what can be fatal actions. And yet it's difficult to describe. Like, what does it feel like? And from the outside looking in, we look at behavior that makes no sense. I don't understand it. And from the inside looking out, it's hard to explain. So let me give you two different analogies. So imagine, if you will, that you have some sort of chronic physical pain, back pain, toothache, whatever it is. And then imagine you've had that for like 10 years and it never stops. Now imagine a time that you have been sad, the loss of a relationship, the death of somebody close to you, the death of a pet. At that point, I think we've all reached there where we're so sad, we literally have this thought, I'm never going to be happy again. Now imagine a time that you had some sense of self-hatred, like you were so disappointed in yourself that maybe you had done something that you thought was unforgivable, something you breached your own ethics. And then add a time when you have been so incredibly tired that not only can't you get out of bed, if you somehow could, by mustering Herculean effort and energy, it is almost impossible to put one step in front of the other. Now take that pain that has been consistent for 10 years, take the sadness which knows no relief, acute self-hatred and fatigue, and put it all together and fashion it as a coat, and then wear it, put heavy weights in it, and then walk into a boxing ring to face the monster. But right before the bell goes off, make sure they put your hands behind your back. And that's what it's like. But let me tell you a story about one of the dogs that came to the sanctuary. Winston was a Boston Terrier. Now, if you don't know what a Boston Terrier, you really do. You've seen one. They're that smaller version of an English bulldog with this cute, smushy face. I actually have one on my lap right now, which I won't show you a picture because she's crazy cute. Her name is Heaven. And they got this little butt, and they're made up of two things and two things only. Typically, they're in that black and white tuxedo. And you can go home right now. If you're there watching at home, just go into your bathroom, take two things. Just say 49% enthusiasm and 51% gas. And boom, there you go. So Bostons will come into the room and their ears are up and their eyes are just bugging out because they got this smushy face and they're just annoyingly happy. Well, this picture was taken on the very first day that Winston came to the sanctuary. And Winston was the exact opposite of what a Boston Terrier was created to be. In fact, when the rescuers put him in my arms, I thought he was dead. I mean, he was barely, he didn't look like he was alive. And then I saw his chest expand and contract just a little bit, and I put him down on the ground. And then he struggled, like with every ounce of effort he had, to his feet, but his head was down and is so far down that his chin dragged on the carpet. And the reason that Winston was the exact opposite of what he had the right to be is some incredibly poor, hellish excuse of a human being decided that the best use of this 20-pound furry innocent soul was to use him as a bait dog in a dogfighting ring. Now, a bait dog's purpose is to give fighting dogs a chance to maul, to fight, to attack, to bite, to eviscerate, to pull apart. And when they put a bait dog in, it's not just with one dog. At a minimum, it's with two, most often more than that. And you can imagine there's no way that Winston could protect himself. And what happens then over time, his physicality, his spirit, his essence, his psychology, everything gets diminished, gets ruined. And all he could do is just retreat into a fetal position and hope and pray that it would end. That's what it's like to be in that ring with this awful, hellish, horrific monster day after day after day. And there are now days when I look in the mirror and I look like our dog Destiny. And you can almost not see that it's a dog except for that cute little black nose and that eye. Now, logically, I know I don't look like this, but on the worst days, the monster has stood me in front of the mirror. And because of body dysmorphia and self-hatred on these worst days, this is what I see. And bipolar 2, and I believe its twin, it has a scent to it. It has a feel to it. It impacts all of who I am. And like Winston, like Destiny, ultimately what happens is it puts us into a place of hopelessness. And I don't think people don't die from our condition. We die from hopelessness. You know, they talk about faith, hope, and love. Love is the greatest. No, it's not. It's not. Love is fickle. Love plays hide and seek. Oftentimes we don't feel worthy of love. Faith is this rock star thing. When our life comes apart, we're like, oh yeah, you know what? No problem. Like, okay, I don't have faith like that. But hope demands nothing of us. Hope is always available. Hope just wants to be with us. You know, you say, hope's like a whole swarm of 8-week-old Labrador puppies. It just wants to be with us. And with hope, anything is possible. And one of the things I talk about, there's an important distinction. And if you've not seen any of Andrew Solomon's TED Talks, please do. There's 3, it's just amazing. And I love this distinction that the opposite of depression is not happiness, it's vitality. Somebody like you and I, one of our brothers and sisters who has lost their fight to the monster and they attempt or they do end their life, oftentimes what people say is, oh, they lost their will to live. No, they did not. Will is about effort and discipline and resilience and all these different things. Like, no, we didn't lose our will, because when we say that somebody lost their will to live, there is the underlying implication that we have given up, that we're weak. We have not. All of us here know what it's like to try to live every single day with this hidden battle. We did not lose our will to live. We lost our want to live. And that is a huge difference. And that's the way I felt when I went into the psychiatric ward. They call it the PUF, which I had no idea what that was. And it's a psychiatric health facility. And they're in a place that you would never think. My life changed in the most extraordinary ways. And on the second day, I sat with this psychiatrist, and he came in, and I didn't quite know who he was because he didn't have a lab coat, didn't have a stethoscope, didn't have a clipboard. And he didn't just start asking these medically based questions. What he was doing, now I look back, is he was creating connection. He was leveraging conversation. He was asking me questions about me, not about my medical condition, but about my life. And then we got on to animals, and of course, like, oh my gosh, don't get me started on that. And then he said, you know what, do you mind if I ask you some questions about your condition? And I got a little defensive, like, okay, here it comes. And he asked me 2 no one had ever asked me. First was, Dave, is there any history, you know, of suicide or depression or anything in your family? And my mind went blank in the moment because it's not a question people ask. And then I said, well, doctor, now that you mention it, my father's father, my grandfather, had killed himself. You don't say commit suicide. He killed himself. He ended his life by suicide when my father was very young. And while my father died when I was young, and I don't have a lot of memories, my three beloved brothers, John, Jim, and Tom, had shared with me how depression had incapacitated our father, how it just like gutted him to the point where cancer could come and just scoop up the remains. And the doctor said, now, David, realize because this is a medical condition, you can inherit the genetics. It's not unusual, but genetics alone, regardless of cancer, diabetes, whatever it is, doesn't mean that someone's going to suffer. It usually has to be, imagine genetics like a dry kindling in a campfire. You got to light it. And the unfortunate thing is, with mental illness, that match is trauma. And then I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, have you suffered any trauma? And again, 48 years old. And when it asked it, I'd never considered it. So as my mind is trying to understand the question, this beautiful man being an expert in interpreting body language said, well, you said you were young when your father died. How old were you? And I said, doctor, I was just 7. He said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you had to live for so many years without your father. That's a traumatic situation. He says, by chance, is there anything else? And there was something else, something so horrific, something so awful that I had never in 48 years said this to someone. I had never shared this because it's not something you share. And yet this man created a safe place, like the safest place in the most unusual place. And before I could give a thought, I said, doctor, when I was 11 years old, an assistant scoutmaster from a Boy Scout troop that I was a new member of, sodomized and raped me, stole away my innocence. And as soon as I said those words, I was regretful because I thought, dear God, why did I share this? But this amazing man reached towards me, actually took my hands in his, just like a father would to a son, and looked at me and he said, it's not your fault. Now, this was so contrary to what the monster convinced me of that I could see his lips moving, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. It made no sense. And again, this man picked up these nonverbal clues, held my hands a little bit tighter and said, son, believe me, it's not your fault. And the second time I could hear it. And, we talk a lot about with our condition about genetics and trauma. And I think genetic can play a part, but I really think it's much more about trauma. And there's this amazing quotation by Jane Levy that says this, that trauma fractures comprehension as a pebble shatters a windshield. The wound at the site of impact spreads across the field of vision, obscuring reality and challenging belief. Before being raped, my belief about myself was this. After trauma, my belief about myself is now this. That's the impact. I believe suicide is a condition of belief. And we look to see what's the impact of trauma on the creation and maintaining of these beliefs. And then over the next 15 days, it was about how do I become well? And it was all about self-care, about putting my self-care on a pedestal, which is the least selfish thing that I can do. It is, in fact, a selfless, messing that up a little bit, because if I take care of my mind, body, and spirit, I have something to give. Not only am I well, I have something in my well that I can dip into and pass along to somebody else. And this is just my approach. It's about diet and sleep and exercise. It's about time outside. It's about counseling and therapy. I love my therapist. I love my psychiatrist who's become like a dad to me. I take my meds. I take lamotrigine and Lexapro. I take those two beautiful things every morning with reverence and thanks. That thank goodness somebody likes doing chemistry because it quiets my symptoms. I have no expectation that it's going to cure me. But what I know is it'll quiet my symptoms so that all of the other truly curative and restorative acts of self-care, those are what's going to make me well. And then my own spiritual practice in this is my job. This is what I do. I am blessed to go around and share my story, to talk about the heroic and loving and compassionate ways people have supported me in an effort to be of service, to try to help. But of everything, it's all about connection. Three most important words, in my opinion, in mental health are connection, connection, connection. And if you look at what's the opposite of being connected, and I actually just found this quote from the great Dr. William James, who's considered to be the founder of American psychology, that no more fiendish punishment could be devised, were such a thing physically possible, than that one should be turned loose in a society and remained unnoticed by all members of society. Who here has felt invisible, like nobody sees me, like I don't matter? And you think about, yes, there would be nothing else that we could be sentenced to that would be hellish. But now let's look, what's the opposite? This is connection. In the words of the great and magnificent Brené Brown, I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship connection. Like, how can hope not become into view when we feel seen, heard, and valued? When we go from not being noticed by society to being embraced by society. That's hope. And for those of us who suffer, realize that there's no other medicine. In the words of Shakespeare, we only have hope. But now how do you measure hope? Like, we think about hope like the panda bear that's going down the slide into the snow. It's just, yeah, that's hope. That's kind of cute. And it's s'mores. It's all these things. It's this beautiful puppy dog who's sitting on my lap. But let me tell you about the hope experiment. So the hope experiment was done some years ago. And I think what happened is the researcher was just like, okay, I got to measure this thing. And so rats are known as incredibly great swimmers. So the researcher took a container of water, put a rat in there, and timed how long could the rat swim until it was about to drown. And it was right about 15 minutes. And right at that critical moment, the researcher would scoop up the rat, hold him close, affirm him, dry him off, put him on a solid surface, give him a chance to collect his breath, and then put him back in the water to see how long could he swim the second time. 15 minutes the first time. The second time ended up being 2.5 days. 2.5 days, 60 hours. The sentient being, at the point of going under, is rescued, goes back in the water and thinks, I was rescued one time. I had the experience of hope one time. Why on earth wouldn't I the second time? That's the power of hope. 15 minutes to 60 hours. The man who saved me on that bridge, I've been treading water for 11 years as a result of that. And Dee and I saw this extraordinary transformation as a result of the connection and the hope with the animals. You know, we look at Winston as this very difficult picture to look at in regards to what depression looks like. Here's Mr. Man. Mr. Man got well. Don't you worry. From skinny and scarred and beaten and bruised to solid and strong and bold and beautiful and a freaking brat. Like, he was just a brat, but he was a happy brat. And then we look at destiny, this view that I think many of you, when we look in the mirror these days, we look like this. Well, here's my sweet girl after that. And you imagine like hope is a pair of clippers that just trims all that stuff off, just trims the whole thing away. And this is who any of us are at the core of our foundation. This is us. This is what we get to do, but we can't do it alone. And so we follow the admonition of this great line that when I is replaced with we, illness is transformed into wellness. It's like a magic trick. Like, pooh, how did that happen? And it's all about the creation of connection. And how do you create connection? And there's 3 ways, but the simplicity of it, I think, is something that we miss. And in the words of the co-founder of Home Depot, that the 2 most powerful things in existence is a kind word and a thoughtful gesture that we always have available to both experience on the receiving end and to give. And because connection is the most pure, powerful form of reciprocity, there's no way we can't benefit. Now, this is Max. Max is what is known as an Italian greyhound. So you got greyhounds, you got whippets, and then you have these, what they call IGs. Well, Max was bigger than the normal IG, so they called him a Biggie Iggy. So Max was the most popular dog at the sanctuary. And you can see that Max has this long snout, the exact opposite of a Boston Terrier. And here's what Max said. Well, people would come inside the house, and we had this big, great room. And I don't know if anybody had walked into a place with 23 dogs, but it was eerily quiet and well mannered. And I think it's because we didn't do any adoption. So there was this permanence. It was this hope-filled space. Here's what Max thought. Even when somebody was in this tight body language, he figured, okay, if he could get his nose in any space around their body, he could unfold all of him. And that's what he would do. And here's the point of the story is, each of us, I think, is only looking for the smallest opening in making connection with another human being. That's all we need. And if you flip it around, that means that each of us who want to be of service to somebody else, we only need to project a small amount. We don't have to be the kind of, I'm a hugger because I'm from California. It doesn't have to be that way. So 3 methods: recognition, understanding, and connection. And it really needs to be in this way, because if we want to connect with somebody, the first thing we like to have to physically recognize their existence. Like, I see you, you matter, you're worthy of my time, you are worthy of consideration. Now, I'm a big one on names. I think for me, that is the way to recognize somebody. And if you think about empirically, names are the gateway to any relationship. Relationship is the foundation of connection. In any moment of connection, you're going to have some experience of hope. It never fails. Now, some people would say, I suck at names. I'm like, okay, you know what it is? It's just practice. Like, how many passwords do you remember? How many lines to prose, to movies, to song, whatever? We can do it. Just practice. And it's really, really fun when you do it, because we've all had the experience where somebody has remembered our name when we had no expectation, and vice versa. It's like that thing can make an enormous difference. And here's one of the ways that I suggest people do it is, when you meet somebody, just say, hey, it may sound like a silly question, but I'm always fascinated. Like, what's the story behind your name? Almost everybody has a unique story. There is some reason why mom and dad, and maybe sometimes at the last minute, are like, why did you name? And one of the best stories, in the short version of it, in appreciation of time, was met a young woman and introduced myself, and her name was Hope. I'm like, whoa, like, without being a stalker, you have no idea what your name means to me. What's the story behind your name? And she said, gosh, I don't know. I'm like, really? Like, your name is incredible. So was in this conference, there's all these people, and all of a sudden I'm moving around in this open area with all these other people. Somebody taps me on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Hope. And I'm like, how did you find me? And she said, I've been looking everywhere around you. I got to show you something. And she puts her phone in front of me and shows this text that she sent to her mom and said, Mom, why did you and Dad name me Hope? And her mom and dad wrote back, because your father and I knew that's what you would bring to the world. I'm like, bingo, that's it. Like, she didn't know the reason. And I say, I would have loved to have been there on the very first day that she introduced herself, said, hey, my name's Hope. So recognition. And then we go to understanding. And Thomas Berger wrote a book called Little Big Man, which he said that the art and science of asking questions is the source of all knowledge. And we know that, especially when we see behavior that makes no sense. Talk to my family like, good Lord, what is up? It makes no sense. And we see people who, like you and I, who live with this condition, it doesn't make sense, But in the words of the great Mr. Rogers, who carried this quote by a social worker, frankly, there isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you heard their story. And oftentimes we are surprised once we hear their story. So I'm holding a goose named Adia, A-D-I-A. Over my right shoulder is Mercy and Grace, and then Dave, the duck, who, I don't know, had an identification issue. I really wanted to be a goose. So we had this beautiful pond. And on the day I put Adia right on the lip of the pond, instead of going into that which he had the right to experience that was created for him, he jumped into this small bathtub-sized water trough that was there for the animals, the farm animals, to drink of. And I'm like, dude, we bring our friends. Some of us may be on the cusp of all these resources, and yet we jump back. Other people jump back into the small bathtub-sized water trough for their suffering. Like, makes no sense. And so I took Adia out. He promptly jumped back in. I took Adia out. He promptly jumped back in. We did this like 10 to 12 times, thankfully. And now I'm moving from, wow, that's curious, to, that's a little odd, to now you're irritating me like crazy. And I think that's true, if I may, for all of us. It makes no sense. I don't understand you. So thankfully, Dee, being the brilliant one, comes upon the scene, looks at it, makes a call to the rescue organization, and comes back and says, sweetheart, guess what I found out? that Adia had lived his whole life in the small confines of an absolutely filthy backyard. That the only water that this beautiful goose had ever seen was the dirty water that filled up just a third of a small little kiddie pool. Of course, this is too much. Bring people to this and we say, man, go this way, it's worked for me. And maybe they tried meds, maybe they had their best friend who says, gosh, if you do this, you're a loser, whatever it is. But if we can understand them, things can change. And ultimately what happened was, in this energy of understanding, being like, okay, my brother, you can have this water trough, I'll just go get another one. He ultimately went into the pond. And I think that that's it. And how we arrive at the place of understanding is by leveraging curiosity. And what the amazing man on that bridge did all those years ago is he leveraged curiosity to create understanding, because in the realization that the most direct path we can take to overcoming our fears around this, and we all have them, is to get to the place of understanding, because the opposite of fear isn't calm, it's understanding. The more we understand, the less we fear. And in doing so, we realize, in the words of the great Lady Bird Johnson, is we all need to have the opportunity to hurt out loud. And in the absence of that, we realize what Parker Palmer says is that violence is what happens when we don't know what else to do with our suffering. And then this last quote is, to not have our suffering recognized is an almost unspeakable form of violence. Like it overwhelms us. We just got to get it out. And if we use curiosity, like the first responder did, the first question out of his mouth was, David, what does it feel like to be depressed? And in that moment, everything slowed down, including my thoughts, because curiosity slows the speed of thought. And he said, David, how long have you lived with this situation? And David, what's it like on your worst days? And then he listened. He listened in the words of the great Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, who reminds us that our listening creates a sanctuary, interesting word. Our listening creates a sanctuary for the homeless parts in another person. I got a chance to hurt out loud. I had my suffering recognized. And then he pivoted. He said, David, would you please tell me, I'd like to understand, what's it like on your best days? And then the question that had me look up was, David, what do you want the rest of your life to look like? What do you want it to be like? What are your dreams? What are your wishes for your life? And I'd seen the view before, but not like it looked that day. And I looked up and I pushed back and I turned to my left. And here's the exclamation point in this whole experience: middle-aged man to middle-aged man. There was no bravado. There was no chest bump. There was no fist bump. He looked at me and he said, David, thank you for telling me how you feel. Recognition, understanding, and now we go to expression. And the same great Dr. William James says that the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. We know this. And appreciation synonymous with recognition, understanding, all these things. Like, we all want this. And there's lots of different ways that we can do it, but I'm a believer in the power of the handwritten note. And we know this to be true. We've all been in the receiving end of these. They're magical. Oftentimes, and I would say that any of us listening right now, we all have some copies of these right now. It's just, they're just sacred. They're amazing. And now I'll tell you a story about one that until 5 years ago, August 31st of every year was still the worst day of the year. I'm a January baby. Quite frankly, and I know this is shocking, I hate summer. I've always hated summer. There's just something around my biorhythm. And come to find out, I have reverse seasonal affective disorder. Like, it is far more difficult for me in the summertime. And in particular, August is terrible. So here you have this confluence of this day in which I still have the thought, the monster would say, you're such a failure. You're an imposter. And then the fact that it's August, it's summer, it's just not big. So 5 years ago, wake up on this day, it's not a good day, but I know I gotta get moving. So I go down to the mailbox and I see that uniquely sized envelope. It's this card. And the card's a picture of a glacier, and it says, advice from a glacier: carve your own path, go slow, channel your strengths, smooth the way for others. Like, I don't want to hear this. What is this crap? And there was no return address. I don't know who this is. And I just want to flick this thing. And on the inside, it says, happy today. That's from my sneaky friend, Greg, who's walked a similar path. And he says, hey, just a note to remind you that you are an extraordinary person with so much to give so many others. You're a tremendous source of healing just by your personal presence. This is not only my sentiment. So many others also believe in you. Believe in yourself. Reject the lies. I love you. As a result of this note showing up on that day, August 31st of every year went from the worst day of the year to my New Year's Day. And every August 31st, I drive back to the bridge and I park my vehicle in the exact same spot, but there is no note. I take my keys because I'm coming back. And this year, this past August 31st, my beloved, my fiance, whose name just happens to be Summer, my beloved, we woke up that day and said, sweetheart, I know what today means to you. Would you let me go with you? So I don't have to tell you what the difference, the contrast between 2011 and 2022, all because a dear friend made sure that this note showed up on that day. I don't have to tell you, I am preaching to the choir in the deepest sense that living with this malady is either one or two or anything related to it, mental illness, it's hell. There's a great quote by Dr. Beverly Shank who says, depression must surely be the first cousin to hell on earth. It is. It is like being a bait dog. It is like looking in the mirror and seeing something that is just so horrific, so ugly, so awful. It's all these things. And yet, while there are still really difficult days, when there are days, I think, for all of us in which the monster is winning, there also is the possibility, by way of connection, quite frankly, that we can activate hope. And in working with the military, what I say to them is hope is a weapon. You know, we think about the gentle side of hope and the soft side of hope, but on the other side of that coin, hope is ruthless. Hope is relentless. Hope is passionately committed to annihilating its enemies of loneliness and despair and hopelessness. Hope never fails because you know what? People never kill themselves when they're hopeful. It never happens. And I'm not saying any of this is easy. It takes work, it takes money, it takes investment. But what I know from my own personal experience is that there are people out there that will, sometimes we got to find them, but there are people out there that will support us. There are organizations like Bipolar Foundation that just wants to help. They're not asking anything of us. They just want to help us. Like where do these angels earthbound to help us to do it? And there are these souls out there. And I think we will win this fight. We will. I don't know how long it's going to take. It may not be in my lifetime now at close to 60. I don't know, but to me, that's really not as important as I know we will get there. And I know we're going to make successes along the way. It's going to be difficult. We're going to lose some souls to suicide. I don't know if we're ever going to get to zero, but we're going to go from 130 a day to 100 a day to 50 a day to 40. And each one of those losses is tragic. But I think that the greatest way that we can honor our brothers and sisters who lose the fight is to commit to doing everything we can. And in my opinion, in addition to everything else, this is not the only way. It doesn't work all the time. But if we can add this realization that connection creates hope, and then apply hope in a moment, maintain hope because all roads of self-care lead to hope, constantly bring hope through recognition, understanding, and expression, we'll win. I know we can win. And I'll end with one last quote from an extraordinary man, Dr. Drew Ramsey. And he puts, in a beautiful, brief way, which is not my forte, both the problem and the solution right here. That his words, that someone you see today is thinking about killing themselves. Your smile, your question, your love could save them. Trust me, they told me it did. And every time I read this quote, I imagine Dr. Ramsey sitting with this patient. Says, how you doing? I'm like, you know what, doctor? It has been really tough. In fact, I was headed to a point of no return, but just walking down the street and somebody smiled at me. I was talking to somebody and all of a sudden the conversation wasn't about them. They wanted to know about me. And I walked to the mailbox or picked up my phone or looked on my text, and someone just said something to me. So your smile, recognition. your question, understanding, your love, expression, and save me. It is simple. It is. Sometimes I think it's too simple that we dismiss it, but from my own personal experience, I know it works. And what I would ask is, as a family, as we are together, at the head of this great foundation, is let's give hope a try. You know, let's just give hope a try and see what happens. So at this point, I turn it back to my amazing friend Micah and ask questions. I can bore you with more stories or whatever you would like.
Well, thank you so much, David. Your story and your storytelling is just so incredible. I was in awe, and I would love for you to keep going, but I think we have some amazing questions and more stories for you to share. So our first one comes in, and it's from an anonymous that says that she's newly diagnosed, a longtime sufferer, but she's wondering if you have any advice on building relationships with new friends or partners while being honest about having bipolar disorder.
And I think that's a great question. And I think the easiest way, I don't know, well, I'm using, I don't like to use that word, but I already said it. I think one of the best ways is to create a relationship with other people is to ask them questions about them. Just questions. Because it's so rare, and I think we all know it, that not many people create the environment where they ask us about us. Usually, and I'm really mad, why do you think I get up and speak? Because I get to talk about me. So, but I think if we can ask them about them, you know, what got you into this particular line of work? What, you know what, in that kind of classic question, if money wasn't in your house, what would you do? You know, what's the best part of do? What, you know, this is something that's difficult for me, and I would love to get your opinion on this. Like, imagine, like, if when someone asks our opinion, like, it establishes a connection. And from those, now, not every relationship is going to be substantial in terms of going out with somebody or having dinner or whatever, but you can have these micro relationships throughout your day. People you see at the gym, your dry cleaner, whatever it is. Each of those touches makes a difference on difficult days. And because you've taken the time to remember their name, because that you have shown an interest in them, they're excited to see you. So I think because of the power of the reciprocity of connection, it's one of the best things that we can do is establishing a relationship, because in the words of the great Dr. Brown, that's the foundation of connection. We derive strength and sustenance from the relationship.
Definitely. I think that's such a good tip that I just need to use more in my daily life. So I think all our audience will gladly agree with that as well. So one thing that IBPF really wants to bring to light are the challenges of men with bipolar disorder who may be less likely to seek help and have higher rates of death by suicide. What would you say to specifically a man out there struggling and who's afraid to come and be open with his diagnosis?
One, I'm sorry, and I understand. You know, I'll tell you a funny story. My son and I got into trap shooting. So we shotguns, and they have those clay pigeons. And so we're there one day. I mean, that's like kind of the apex of masculinity. I mean, you're shooting guns, all this stuff. So there's a big guy, and I've been there enough where I kind of knew people. It goes back to the first question. I like to create this connection. This one big man, Greg. And so we're buying some shotgun shells. Like, this is masculinity. And Greg looks at me and says, you know, hey, David, you know, what kind of work do you do? Now, in that moment, I froze. And I literally was going to lie and say, I drive a cement truck. But I just thought, and I said, I have suffered from bipolar 2. I use the word depression because if I say bipolar, they're going to think number one. And we know with bipolar 2 is depression. I said, you know what? I've suffered from depression a good part of my life. In fact, got so bad I was going to kill myself. But because of other people, I journeyed from mental illness to mental illness. And I share my story. And then I'm like, oh, God. And he looked at me, this big man. He said, you know what? Thanks for doing that work. I really appreciate it. So to my brothers out there, I'm not saying it's easy. And I understand the hesitancy. So, and some people will think of us, that look at us and say, we're less than a man, that we're sick, lame, and crazy. Like, you know what? If you knew how difficult it was to live with this, you would see me in a different light. But what I'm going to say to you, brothers, is that group of people is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, primarily because of foundations like the Bipolar Foundation. Is that, with the pandemic also, mental illness and suicide now has come out. There's more and more people who are looking at what I think is the unfair label and the cap in which we men are allowed to express ourselves. But let me tell you just another quick story. I did some work with elementary school kids last week, which was incredible. At one point, I was talking about feelings and everything else, and I said, "Hey, do you think it's okay for adults to cry, particularly men?" And every single kid said, "Oh, absolutely so." I'm like, really? So when you see somebody like me, who could be the age of your grandfather, like, what do you want to do? And she says, "We want to come and take that away from you. We want to take that pain away." I'm like, wow. So there's the generation of kids that are coming up who are just going to continue to make it easier and easier and easier for us to share. Again, I'm not saying it's easy. There's going to be times when we confront ignorant, stupid people. You know what? But there are other people out there who are going to be the exact opposite.
Wow. I thank you for that. That was such a great answer to such an important question. And it kind of leads me thinking, you've made your purpose kind of sharing your experience and bringing to life all these important aspects. How do you think sharing your experiences has helped your mental health in any way? Do you think it's, yeah, I see you not.
Oh, it's, there's a great, it's, I think, peer support, I think, Micah, is the single best thing that we can do. So there's two great acronyms of hope, I'm sure that you know. The first is hold on, pain ends. Like, well, yeah, that's kind of hard to believe in the midst of pain. But I think if we all imagine it, even in long spells of hurt, there is that point where we feel better. Even if, for those of us with bipolar 2, we have those little blips of hypomania, like, dear God, let me just stay in this space, but we go back. But the other one, in regards to your question, dear friend, is that hope is hearing other people's experiences. Like, that's it. Like, you realize, oh, like, you feel like I do? Like, oh man, I thought I was the only one to feel that way. And there's in that just that slight little hue of what may be the best thing of all is a normalization of the experience. So it really goes back, though, in terms of, and it's not, I say it's a selfish endeavor, but it really goes back to what Lady Bird Johnson says, that, in this case, I'll personalize it. I need to be given the opportunity to hurt out loud. I need to have my suffering recognized. I need to do something different with my suffering, or I'm going to direct the violence back to self. So sharing is so critical. And, it's funny that I was just thinking about this today. I was given the first opportunity to speak about 10 years ago by a dear, dear friend of mine named Will Taylor. And I remember when he approached me and said, "You know what, David, I'd like you to come share your story." And I'm like, dude, why would I do that? That would be like, and bless his heart, he's still a great friend. He was right. There was just, I didn't know it at the time. And it took me still a while to understand it. But the more I do it now, Mike, is just like, there's not a time that I don't share in some way, shape, or form, one-on-one or a group, or the incredible honor of like this, that I'm like, man, I'm having a great day. Watch out, family, because I'm going to be annoyingly happy. And you live with me, so deal with it.
Wow. I think that reminds me of our World Bipolar Day theme a lot, because what we're trying to do is share these stories and give people the strength and bravery to do so. So I think you talking and doing so and answering that question will really inspire other people as well. So thank you. We have a question from General Martin, who was able to join us, and he said, "Great talk, David. How often do you see a therapist or psychiatrist?" Which kind of leads back to our point about sharing your story.
So if I may, real quick, for those of you who don't know, 2-star Major General Martin, so this soul, as a very high-ranking general officer, is doing something that nobody else is doing in the military paradigm of masculinity, is going out and sharing his story. So please look up this, who has become an incredible mentor to me. And just like, this is what a man should be at this point. So, sir, right now it's once a week for counseling, as many times a week as I can, probably 1 to 2 times a week for peer support. And then my psychiatrist, Dr. C, I see him once a month. But what's unusual about Dr. C is we talk about medication, but he's a Jungian. So it's all about dreams and archetypes and all this other stuff. And he's become like a dad to me. And I'll just super quick story. I gave my first TED talk and he said he wanted to see it. So I sent it to him and I we don't email and stuff in between. And so I walk in, he's very methodical, comes out, David, how are you? Does the same thing every time. David, how are you? Walks to the desk. I sit on the couch. He has a little bowl of shelled walnuts. He takes a walnut, pulls out a paper. I'm like, dear God, dude, what did you think? And so he looked at me and he said, one of the best talks I've ever seen. I'm like, oh, there we go. I'm good. So like, who could call their psychiatrist like their dad? And then, sir, it's like my relationship with you. My brother is a retired 2-star general. Actually, both General Martin and my brother graduated from West Point. It's just these amazing men who are now transforming, as I say to the general, he's at the tip of the spear that is going to drive the arrow right into the monster and make him suffer. And we're going to dance on his grave very happily.
Awesome. We had 2 more questions from him, and I'm sure you'd be happy to answer them. What is your perspective on the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2? How do you see them as more challenging, not more challenging than either one, but what's your perspective on those 2?
So sir, in answer to your question, and I don't have it, but I have the piece. Well, I'm sorry, I don't have it right here. I have the piece of paper on the very first day, and I've been with Dr. C now, I think coming up on 7 years. The very first day when I shared, he said, well, do you have a diagnosis? And I said, well, yeah, they diagnosed me as MDD, or major depressive disorder. And those of us here, we already know that it's somewhere close to 50% of that diagnosis are actually like you and I, we're bipolar 2. And so he showed me, so I drew a line. He said, okay, we know about bipolar 1, what General Martin is fighting, this place of mania, which can dip down to this kind of a circle like this. So bipolar 2, here's the line. We live in this step below it, in this that low word of low-grade depression, dysthymia. And then we're cruising along, and it's like somebody opens a trap door and we go down to a place of hell that it's almost unsurvivable. And somehow we work our way up. We have our own cycling, and every once in a while, we jump up over that line, as I mentioned before, into hypomania. It doesn't have the same grandiosity as mania, but for me, hypomania is I get a lot more done and I feel connected. So I think I think they're both hellacious. That's the distinction, which I think helps people understand. But sir, you've been incredibly honest about yours, and especially when you tell me about the mania part, in which people think, oh, that's great. You made it clear no. And then we can relate on the depression part. I mean, it's like hell on earth. It's awful.
Yeah, definitely. I think that explanation of it really makes it so not simple, but easier for folks to understand, especially folks who don't necessarily live with bipolar. But that distinction between the 2, they're both awful, but just in different ways, is a great way to understand it more further. And then we have time for one more question from an anonymous attendee who was recently diagnosed. And they were wondering, what insight do you have for those who were recently diagnosed, but whose loved ones are struggling to accept their diagnosis?
Yeah, and I totally can understand that. That would be, my situation is different, in which I've not experienced that. So I can only imagine how difficult that is, where people can't understand how you're suffering. And it could be, and this thought just came to me, is maybe just say, may I ask you a favor? You being my brother or sister here who are suffering, just say, will you just listen as I share what it's like for me to live with this experience? And maybe ask the question to him, would you please share what's your interpretation? What's your perspective of what I'm living with? And I think what happens in those 2 questions coming together, I think we'll understand each other a little bit more. And I think that it's just literally off the top of my head. I don't think, a curiosity, nothing bad happens out of curiosity. If you look at kids, they want to know something, so they ask the question. And I think the beautiful thing is, once we understand somebody, even if we don't agree with them, in the place of angst, we can then separate from them. But in the place like in your family, I think there is that part of them that truly wants to understand your suffering, and you that also wants that. In the place of understanding, man, things transform in ways that are just extraordinary. But we have to know, we have to understand one another. And the only way that we can arrive at understanding is by way of curiosity. Because assumptions block connection, understanding creates connection, understanding therefore creates hope. In the place of hopeful, anything's possible.
I just want that message like tattooed on me. Hope, or connection fuels hope, and hope saves lives. That is just such a great message, and one I guess we'll leave off with. Thank you so much, David, and everyone for joining us today for our World Bipolar Day webinar. I hope that the stories and insight that David shared helped you all feel less alone, and we're so lucky to have him here. So thank you so much, David, for joining us. If our listeners would like more information on you, how can they connect with you and learn more?
So please, literally, you can call me on the phone, 916-247-6389. Email is david@davidwoods, kind of like out in the woods, davidwoodsbartley.com. I will also have that information will go to my dear friend Micah, and we'll also make a PDF of this PowerPoint. Send it out. You can do anything with it you want. You do not need my permission. Put your name on it. I'm fine. It's all good. You have probably better stories than I do. And I was blessed and honored to be amongst people that are so brilliant to give 2 different TED Talks. I will send those links if you're interested. And they're just stories. I'm a storyteller. I don't, I'm really moving in the wake of the great work of like what General Martin's doing. So I'm just trying to support this extraordinary man. And if I could put words in the General Martin's mouth, I think what the general said is hope is a weapon. That's what he's doing. So for the men out there who I'm particularly passionate to support is, brothers, we got a guy like this at the front. All we need to do is get behind him.
Definitely. Oh, I love your guys' message. And if you'd ever like to learn more about David or General Martin, you can check out www.ibpf.org, and we'll have all their information on there for you guys to connect with them. If you enjoyed our webinar today, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, because we'll have more videos, and you can watch General Martin's past webinar as well. We hope that you can continue to celebrate World Bipolar Day by connecting with us and connecting with others. And remember that you're not alone. There is hope in hearing other people's experiences. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody.